And then it went to, you know what, this is stupid. Now we're paying for office space that we're barely using. So we went to full hybrid. And what we found out within the first 30 days is we needed to be in the same room sometimes, not all the time. So then we spent the last, I don't know, few months getting together like once or twice a week for an hour or two. And what we found out is that's not enough either. And so I'm redoing the garage right now to have put the podcast studio out there and like have a little operations center so that when we do need to come together, we got a spot, you know, and then if these guys want to take a break and go for a walk around the farm, the pond, you know, like go pet the freaking goats or whatever, you know, like they can. So, but to your point though, right? Like there is a value add to being in person in a lot of scenarios. It doesn't have to be all the time.
Totally.
But you do need to be together.
You know, your story is one that probably resonates with a lot of people listening, and it's something that I hear all the time. And interestingly enough, culture's super important, and there's a time to be together and solve problems together. There's that dynamic that you're talking about, and that's undeniable. And we can look way far back. Like think of sales organizations from years ago. You know, let's go back years and years ago. The sales organization was a field organization, but they were pulled in for an annual sales meeting, and then maybe halfway through the year there was a regional meeting, right? Not a national meeting, and then you know periodically their leader would go out and ride with them on sales calls. So if we look at maintaining a successful sales force as a remote workforce, they were always being pulled in. There was always touch time. There was that scheduled time together. So that's irreplaceable. And in a small organization, small, again, mid-sized, big, it's all relative. But in a small organization, that touch time also replaces business systems and ways of transacting. As the organization grows, or if the organization wants to grow, the need for a business system and some of that work that I do, it really comes into play and enables that virtual workforce to really perform effectively. Right. So, you know, one of the common questions I get, well, how do I know if they're working? Well, if you have a business system, you know if they're working because they're producing results. And at the end of the day, if they're producing the measured result that you want to see, do you care if they're working 35 or 55? I don't think you do. And if they're hitting the goals, if they're doing what you need them to do, and if it's evident, then you're all good, you know? So I mentioned doing strategy deployment as like a common engagement. Another common engagement is to come in and build out some of the underpinnings of a business system to enable everybody in the business to perform almost as well as the best guy or best person, right? So, because that's another big question. It says, hey, we got this rock star over here, then we got kind of everybody else, and then we got this one loser that we're not sure if we should get, right? At the end of the day, with a mature business system, not only can that team work virtually, but you can raise the level of play almost as good as the good guy, almost across the board. There's always an anomaly. There's always that one person that needs to be managed, right? But you can raise that level of play and you can enable that growth.
That's interesting you say that. I definitely like the power of process. I think like no matter what part of your business is, you need to have a process in place, period, right? And for so many reasons, but I think it's interesting that you say that of leveling up everyone so that they're performing close to the best person, because I don't know if it's E-Myth or Traction or whatever it is, but when they talk about process, they talk about building process to the lowest common denominator of intelligence and skill set, right? And that's always the approach I've been. It's like, all right, well, I need to build a process that, you know, even a caveman could do, so to speak. Right? Thanks, Geico.
Right. We assume this is our common discussion. We have to decide what level of incoming knowledge and capability and desire the people you're hiring have to have. And that's where, when you talk about a business system, it really is a system. So if we're putting the standard work in place, the processes, then we have to ask ourselves, do we have a standard organization, right? Is our organization designed standard in a way that this role in the organization is responsible or owns this process or this standard work? And then as soon as we start asking ourselves that question, who's executing the standard work and where they are in the org, then we say, man, when we have to hire to fill this organization, what's the minimum standard we need to hire to so they can come in and be successful with the standard work, with the process, right? So when we talk about business system, that's where we start to talk about the interrelated components of it. And it's easy for it to become overwhelming for a lot of people. So when I get engaged, I commonly start wherever their problem is and start to kind of open the door and show them what could be. And then they start to ask questions and say, oh yeah, well, how we answer that is we incorporate this other component, right? And that's where, before you know it, we've polished up a bunch of different moving pieces.
Yeah.
And it's a fundamental game changer, Yeah.
Yeah. The power of process. Kind of like you, we work ourselves out of a job to some extent at some point in time. We may be there to help tweak and maybe do a little design work, but from an overall marketing, like our job is to help companies grow to a point where they can afford their own in-house department.
Perfect.
And leave the outsourced solution. But and
you
can't do that without systems and processes.
Oh, 100%. And if you're doing it without it, it's just slower and it's new every time. It's never the
new
same.
every time.
You can't learn. You can't implement the learning.
You can't fix it when it breaks. It's I get really excited about this stuff, right? But I was telling my team, like, listen, I'm like, we've been building these different processes for different operational things in our business. And I'm like, listen, if we don't have a written down process with easy to understand steps, then every time something goes wrong, we have to start all over again, create a whole new process because we don't know where it broke.
Right.
But if we have steps that we're following every single time, then when something goes wrong, we can say, well, steps 1 and steps 2 went fine, but step 3 got all screwed up.
You got it.
So now we know where things are breaking and we can fix that piece and then move on about our business. Like
100%.
It's amazing.
It is.
It's amazing. It's still hard as hell.
It is. And and one of the it's funny because I hear you saying that. One of the challenges, unfortunately, is at this point there's been a lot of businesses that have talked the talk but not walked the walk. And as a result, there's a lot of employees, a lot of people out there who have been part of a business that's talked the talk. So their only experience is, I've heard those words before and that didn't work.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, let's talk some more, right? And if sure enough, every damn time it comes down to a situation where a business kind of half tried something, dipped their toe in the water, adopted the language, but not the way of acting or leading. And it came up short. So that's one of the things that I'm actually commonly faced with is getting that initial momentum because sometimes people hear process and they pull back, or they hear standard work and they pull back. And it's legitimate because what I often say is I feel like the language has been polluted.
Sure.
So when I speak, I don't speak about lean, but the birth of what I do is 70% lean. Yeah. And where we go in the end of the day is truly lean. But that word has been thrown around so much and unfortunately has such a negative feel.
Well, now it kind of means like pared down, slimmed down.
And people use the word lean when they're talking about firing people. And if you look at lean, there's no getting rid of people in a lean transformation. There's none. Like
what is it? We're lean sizing? Is that what they
right? I don't know. But anyway, so it's you're 100% on the money. And the other thing I'll say too is two of the large companies. So there's 3 really large companies that I've worked for as a W-2 employee.
Sure.
And 2 of them approach this thing we're talking about completely from opposite ends of the spectrum. And interestingly enough, so it's General Electric and Danaher.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the former leader of Danaher is now leading General Electric.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I was with Danaher first, then I went to GE. So I brought my Danaher experience to GE, and I was like, what are these people doing, right? And GE is very incestuous. They have development and it's all great stuff, but they have development. So there's a lot of people in GE that came up through the GE school